Edit, are you jealous? Naomi Brooks asked, and the crystal glass stopped halfway to Vincent Romano's lips. Every voice inside the Romano Foundation ballroom vanished so suddenly that the soft crackle of candle flames seemed louder than the string quartet still playing beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Warm amber light poured across polished Italian marble, reflecting from silver champagne buckets, black tuxedos, and silk evening gowns until the entire room looked suspended between luxury and disbelief. Vincent Romano stood at the center of the reception exactly as he always did. Perfectly still, one hand loosely wrapped around a crystal flute he had never tasted. His charcoal tuxedo fit with effortless precision. His white pocket square remained perfectly folded, and his expression carried the same disciplined calm that had built both admiration and fear throughout New York's most powerful circles. Governors lowered their voices around him. Billionaires waited for him to speak first. No one interrupted him. No one joked with him. And certainly no one challenged him in front of half the city's elite. Naomi had just done all three. She stood less than 5 feet away, dressed in a sharply tailored black executive suit instead of the designer gowns surrounding her, a slim leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. The rich aroma of freshly roasted espresso drifted from the private coffee station, while the delicate fragrance of white lilies floated between marble columns. She tilted her head slightly, her smile quiet rather than reckless, as though she had simply asked the most ordinary question in the world. Moments earlier, a young investment founder had laughed while complimenting her confidence, teasing that Vincent probably disliked anyone else stealing his favorite assistant's attention. A few nearby guests chuckled politely. Naomi had followed the entrepreneur's gaze toward Vincent, noticed the smallest pause as he slowly turned the stem of his glass between 2 fingers, and then spoken the sentence that froze an entire ballroom. Are you jealous? Somewhere behind the orchestra, a silver fork slipped from someone's hand and struck fine porcelain with a sharp metallic ring. Nobody bent to retrieve it. Even the violinist hesitated before finding the melody again. 2 security officers standing near the entrance instinctively straightened their shoulders without taking another step. Camera lenses quietly shifted until every one of them pointed toward Vincent. He looked directly at Naomi. His face betrayed nothing. No irritation. No surprise. No amusement. Only the same unreadable composure that had unsettled competitors for decades. Naomi met his eyes without lowering hers. She adjusted the leather portfolio beneath her arm, brushed an invisible crease from the sleeve of her jacket, and waited. The silence stretched until it became heavier than the music itself. Vincent slowly placed the untouched champagne flute onto a polished walnut table. Crystal touched wood with little more than a whisper. He took one measured step toward Naomi, then another. Warm light caught the silver cufflinks beneath his jacket sleeves as he stopped directly in front of her. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Would you really like an answer? Vincent asked quietly, his voice calm enough that everyone leaned forward to hear it. Naomi's smile deepened by the smallest fraction. Only if it surprises everyone. Another heartbeat passed. Vincent buttoned the front of his jacket, turned without another word, and walked away from the ballroom through towering carved oak doors, leaving hundreds of stunned guests staring first at the departing Mafia Boss, and then back at the only woman who had ever dared ask him that question in public, while no one in the room could guess that his silence was already the first move in an answer far greater than anyone expected. Edit 3 weeks earlier, Naomi Brooks arrived at the Romano estate carrying a single leather travel bag and a neatly folded employment contract inside a navy portfolio. Massive wrought iron gates opened without a sound, revealing a limestone mansion surrounded by sculpted cypress trees and quiet fountains whose water shimmered beneath bronze lanterns. The air carried the clean scent of cedar and polished stone, while luxury sedans disappeared beyond the curved driveway. Waiting. Beneath the entrance portico stood Evelyn Pierce, the estate's executive administrator, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. She handed Naomi a silver identification badge before leading her across the marble foyer where crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across the floor. There are 3 rules everyone learns here, Evelyn said without slowing her pace. Never keep Mr. Romano waiting. Never ask him personal questions. Never mistake his silence for permission. Naomi clipped the badge onto her jacket and glanced toward a grand staircase carved from white Italian marble. And if someone breaks a rule? Evelyn stopped beside an antique grandfather clock whose pendulum echoed softly through the hall. They usually don't stay long enough to break another. The following morning, precisely at 7 o'clock, Naomi entered Vincent Romano's executive office carrying a porcelain cup of black coffee. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, while the rich aroma of leather-bound books mixed with freshly ground espresso. Walnut shelves lined the walls, every folder rested in perfect alignment, and even the fountain pens lay parallel to the polished edge of the desk. Vincent reviewed financial reports without looking up. Naomi placed the coffee beside his right hand, noticed one document extending slightly beyond the stack beneath it, and gently squared the corners before stepping back. Vincent finally lifted his eyes. "Who asked you to touch my desk?" His voice remained calm, almost conversational. Naomi met his gaze without hesitation. "Nobody." She nodded toward the papers. They looked uncomfortable. A security officer stationed near the doorway lowered his eyes to hide his reaction. Vincent glanced at the document, then quietly slid another fraction of an inch until it matched exactly where Naomi had placed it. "Interesting observation," he said before returning to the report. "I appreciate organized paperwork." The room settled back into silence, but nothing inside it felt quite the same. 2 days later, Vincent crossed the executive corridor with his usual measured stride, reviewing appointments scheduled to the minute. Afternoon sunlight stretched across polished oak flooring, while the faint fragrance of white orchids drifted from crystal vases placed along the hallway. Naomi walked beside him, reading tomorrow's itinerary. She stopped suddenly, closed the folder, and held it toward him. "You're double-booked at 3:15. Vincent continued walking. "I never double-book meetings." Naomi remained where she was. "Today you did." He turned back, accepted the folder, scanned the schedule for 2 silent seconds, then changed direction without another word. Several executives waiting outside the larger conference room exchanged puzzled glances as Vincent entered a smaller meeting room instead, exactly as Naomi had suggested. Nobody commented. Nobody needed to. Later that evening, golden light faded across the estate, while quiet piano music drifted from a distant reception hall. Vincent paused outside Naomi's office where she organized the following week's calendar beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp. He knocked once against the open doorframe. She looked up. "Miss Brooks," he said evenly, "beginning tomorrow, you will report directly to me. Consider it a test. Do not mistake it for trust. : Edit. The first week inside Vincent Romano's private office unfolded with mechanical precision until Naomi Brooks began changing its rhythm through details so small that no one could explain why the atmosphere felt different. Morning sunlight spilled across the walnut conference table, warming the polished grain while the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso drifted from a brass coffee machine tucked beside a wall of leather-bound books. Every meeting started exactly on time. Every document rested in flawless alignment. Every employee lowered their voice before stepping across the office threshold. Naomi followed every rule that protected Vincent's time and quietly ignored the ones designed only to intimidate people. On Tuesday morning, she placed his coffee on the right side of the desk instead of the left. Vincent reached instinctively toward the usual spot before stopping halfway. He looked up from a stack of contracts. Wrong place. Naomi glanced toward his shoulder. "You always twist to reach the left. This saves you the movement." The office fell silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock above the fireplace. Vincent picked up the cup from exactly where she had placed it, took a slow sip, and continued reading without moving it. No one in the room missed what had just happened. 2 days later, Vincent reviewed acquisition reports while standing before the panoramic windows overlooking Midtown. Afternoon light flashed across neighboring glass towers while the low hum of the building's climate system blended with distant traffic nearly 40 stories below. Naomi entered carrying a crystal pitcher filled with sparkling water and slices of fresh lemon. She stopped beside him, looked through the glass at the skyline, then back at him. "People probably think you're standing here planning something terrifying." Vincent continued reading without lifting his eyes. "Do you?" She poured water into a crystal tumbler. Tiny bubbles climbed toward the surface. "No." She placed the glass beside him. I think you're deciding whether tomorrow's coffee should be stronger." A junior executive waiting outside the office pressed his lips together to hide a smile. Vincent capped his fountain pen and looked directly at Naomi. "You enjoy testing boundaries." She folded her arms lightly. "Only the unnecessary ones." He reached for the water instead of asking for coffee. Another routine changed without discussion. By Friday, executives from 3 international firms gathered around the 12-foot conference table beneath warm recessed lighting. The scent of cedar from freshly polished paneling mixed with dark roast coffee, while city traffic shimmered beyond the glass walls. Naomi moved effortlessly between guests, replacing empty glasses, rearranging presentation folders, and quietly correcting a malfunctioning projector before anyone realized it had frozen. During a brief pause, one visiting CEO joked that Vincent looked as though smiling violated company policy. A few nervous laughs followed before disappearing into uncomfortable silence. Naomi stepped beside Vincent, straightened the microphone in front of him, and said softly enough for only those closest to. "Here, if you smile once, they'll probably stop checking whether they're about to lose their companies." Vincent closed the presentation folder in front of him. For the briefest instant, the corner of his mouth lifted before settling back into its usual composure. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Shoulders relaxed. Negotiations flowed naturally. Even the visiting executives spoke with greater confidence. After the meeting, whispers followed Naomi through every corridor of Romano headquarters. Some employees insisted she was reckless. Others quietly wondered whether she was the only person alive capable of making Vincent Romano almost smile. Late that afternoon, as golden light stretched across the marble lobby and the faint fragrance of fresh lilies drifted from the reception desk, Vincent stepped out of his office just as Naomi finalized next week's calendar. He stopped in front of her, buttoned his charcoal jacket, and spoke with calm certainty. "Clear your Friday evening. You'll accompany me to the Romano Foundation Gala." Every conversation nearby ended instantly, because everyone understood that Vincent Romano had just placed Naomi Brooks beside him where the entire city would be watching. Edit Friday evening transformed the Romano Foundation into the brightest address in Manhattan. Crystal chandeliers poured golden light across polished Italian marble, while the low melody of a live string quartet drifted beneath conversations spoken in measured voices. The fragrance of white orchids blended with aged oak, expensive perfume, and freshly brewed espresso carried from a private coffee bar hidden beyond the ballroom entrance. Naomi Brooks stepped through the grand doors wearing a sharply tailored black evening suit instead of the designer gowns surrounding her, a slim leather portfolio replacing the jeweled handbags carried by socialites. She belonged there without trying to resemble anyone else. Vincent Romano entered moments later. Conversations dissolved before he reached the center of the room. Investors interrupted themselves. Senators straightened their jackets. Photographers lowered their voices before lifting their cameras. Vincent acknowledged, each greeting with a single nod, never lingering longer than necessary, while Naomi quietly adjusted his schedule between introductions with the efficiency of someone who already knew where every conversation should begin and where it should end. Throughout the evening, Vincent noticed something he had never expected to notice. Naomi anticipated every interruption before it arrived. When a donor monopolized his attention, she redirected another guest with a graceful change of topic. When an elderly trustee struggled with the crowded staircase, she reached him before security did. When the keynote speaker became trapped inside an endless conversation, she recovered the schedule with nothing more than a polite smile and a perfectly timed interruption. Vincent never thanked her publicly. He simply allowed every one of her decisions to stand exactly as she made them. During a brief pause between speeches, Naomi joined Vincent beside a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering skyline. Beyond the glass, the Hudson reflected ribbons of silver beneath the city lights while cool air drifted through a partially open terrace door, carrying the faint scent of cedar from the landscaped gardens below. Naomi handed Vincent an updated itinerary. "You have 6 conversations left." Vincent scanned the page once. "You crossed out 2. She slipped the original schedule into her portfolio. Neither would accomplish anything tonight. He looked at the revised list for another second before folding it neatly into his inside pocket. "You're becoming comfortable making decisions for me." Naomi folded her arms lightly. Only the ones you were already going to make. For the smallest fraction of a second, the corner of Vincent's mouth hinted at movement before returning to complete composure. Across the ballroom, several executives exchanged puzzled glances. They had spent years trying to predict Vincent Romano. Naomi simply spoke to him without hesitation. Minutes later, a young technology investor named Ethan Caldwell approached, carrying 2 sparkling water glasses. "Miss Brooks," he said with an easy smile. "I've been trying to introduce myself all evening." Naomi accepted. One glass with polite appreciation. "You've succeeded." Ethan laughed. "Would you let me buy you coffee after the gala? Somewhere that doesn't require a security clearance." Their conversation remained light, respectful, and brief. Vincent happened to glance toward them while concluding a discussion with 2 international bankers. His sentence paused almost imperceptibly before continuing. Naomi noticed the hesitation from across the ballroom. She thanked Ethan for the conversation, turned toward Vincent, and quietly walked in his direction while camera flashes reflected against polished marble columns. Stopping only a few feet away, she met Vincent's steady gaze with calm confidence. Around them, conversations faded one by one until only the soft violin melody remained. Then, wearing the faintest smile, Naomi asked the single question that would freeze an entire ballroom and change everything that followed. Edit, are you jealous? Naomi's voice settled into the silence with astonishing calm, yet it echoed through the ballroom more powerfully than the orchestra. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble while the fragrance of white orchids drifted through the still air. Every nearby conversation disappeared. Champagne glasses paused halfway to waiting hands. Even the violinists softened their final notes as though the room itself had begun listening. Ethan Caldwell slowly lowered the sparkling water he had been holding. A senator glanced toward Vincent Romano, then immediately looked away. Photographers instinctively turned their cameras toward the center of the ballroom. Naomi remained exactly where she stood, one hand resting lightly against the leather portfolio beneath her arm, her posture composed, her expression carrying nothing more than quiet curiosity. She had not challenged Vincent's authority. She had challenged the one subject no one believed existed beneath his perfectly controlled exterior. Vincent looked directly into her eyes. His face revealed nothing. No irritation. No amusement. No visible surprise. He slowly rotated the stem of his untouched crystal flute between his fingers, the faint scrape of crystal against skin, almost disappearing beneath the distant strings. 5 silent seconds passed. Then 10. Nobody dared interrupt. Ethan attempted to ease the tension with a nervous smile. That might be the boldest question anyone has asked tonight. No one answered him. Naomi never lowered her gaze. She had watched Vincent closely for weeks. Whenever another executive demanded too much of her time, his schedule somehow shifted, so she returned sooner. Whenever another department borrowed her for the afternoon, a new meeting mysteriously required her presence beside him. He had never commented on those decisions. He had simply made them. Tonight she wanted to know whether he would finally admit why. Vincent placed the untouched glass onto a silver tray carried by a passing server. The crystal met polished metal with one clear note that rang through the silence. He took 2 measured steps until only a few feet separated him from Naomi. Warm light reflected from the silver cufflinks beneath his charcoal jacket. "Do you always expect dangerous questions to receive simple answers?" he asked quietly. Naomi's smile deepened just enough to suggest she had anticipated the response. "No." She folded one arm beneath the portfolio. "I expect honest ones." Around them, dozens of guests leaned forward almost imperceptibly. A board member stopped writing notes. 2 security officers exchanged a quick glance before returning to perfect stillness. Vincent studied Naomi for another long moment before reaching toward her. Several guests instinctively drew a breath, expecting the conversation to end badly. Instead, Vincent gently lifted the portfolio from beneath her arm, brushed away a tiny speck of dust that no one else could have seen, and returned it to her hands with deliberate care. "You almost missed this," he said evenly. Naomi accepted it without breaking eye contact. "Thank you." Confusion swept across the room. There was no anger, no public reprimand, no attempt to embarrass her, only impossible restraint. Vincent buttoned his jacket with one smooth motion and turned toward the ballroom entrance. Halfway there, He stopped without looking back. Continue enjoying your evening, he said to the guests. Miss Brooks. He paused just long enough for every person present to wonder what came next. Tomorrow morning. 7 o'clock. My office. Without another word, he walked through the towering carved oak doors and disappeared into the private wing, leaving an entire ballroom stunned by the calm ultimatum and Naomi standing alone with the unmistakable certainty that whatever awaited her at 7 the next morning would be Vincent Romano's real answer. Edit morning arrived with the quiet precision that defined every corner of the Romano estate. Pale sunlight spilled across the polished walnut floor of Vincent Romano's office, while the rich aroma of freshly brewed espresso blended with the faint scent of cedar drifting from the library beyond. The city skyline shimmered through floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside the room nothing moved except the slow pendulum of an antique clock. At exactly 7 o'clock, Naomi Brooks stepped through the doorway carrying Vincent's black coffee. She placed the porcelain cup on the right side of his desk without a word. Vincent looked at the cup, then at her, before sliding a thick ivory envelope across the polished wood. It stopped directly in front of her hands. The heavy paper carried the embossed Romano family crest pressed into silver foil. Open it, he said. Naomi broke the seal carefully. Inside rested a new executive identification badge attached to a black leather holder. Beneath her name were 4 words that immediately changed the room. Executive Director, Chairman's Office. She looked from the badge to Vincent without speaking. Warm morning light reflected from the silver lettering while the quiet hiss of the espresso machine faded into silence. This belongs to someone with more experience, she said. Vincent rose from his chair, walked around the desk, and gently lifted the badge from her hands. Instead of taking it back, he clipped it onto the lapel of her tailored black jacket himself. It belongs, he replied evenly, to the person who has already been doing the job. The office remained perfectly still. No celebration, no dramatic speech, only one deliberate action that quietly rewrote Naomi's place beside him. By mid-morning, the announcement had spread through Romano headquarters. Elevators opened onto executive floors where conversations paused as Naomi walked by. Security updated her clearance without asking questions. Department directors greeted her before approaching Vincent. Every calendar request, every strategic meeting, every public appearance now passed across her desk first. Nobody challenged the decision because everyone understood exactly whose signature stood beneath it. That afternoon, the Romano Foundation hosted a private luncheon inside its glass conservatory. Sunlight filtered through towering skylights, filling the room with soft gold while the fragrance of blooming citrus trees floated above crisp linen tablecloths. Naomi coordinated arrivals with calm precision, redirecting schedules and greeting donors before they reached Vincent. Ethan Caldwell arrived carrying a bouquet of white orchids tied with a navy ribbon. Congratulations, he said warmly. I suppose coffee will be harder to schedule now. Naomi accepted the flowers with a grateful smile. Probably. Before either of them could continue, Vincent approached. Ethan offered a courteous handshake. Vincent accepted it with effortless professionalism. His eyes briefly settled on the bouquet. Without asking permission, he adjusted the slightly loosened ribbon around the stems, ensuring it rested neatly before handing the flowers back to Naomi. Place them in fresh water within an hour, he said calmly. They'll last longer. Naomi nodded. I will. Ethan watched Vincent walk away before quietly exhaling through a smile. That's the most polite warning I've ever received. Naomi looked after Vincent without answering. Later that afternoon, the executive board assembled around a 20-foot walnut conference table beneath warm recessed lighting. Leather chairs settled into silence as Vincent stood at the head of the room. He closed the final agenda folder and looked once toward Naomi before addressing the directors. Effective immediately, he said. All requests involving my schedule, foundation affairs, executive decisions, and public representation will be handled through Miss Naomi Brooks. Her judgment carries my authority. Chairs stopped moving. Pens remained suspended above notebooks. Every director slowly turned toward Naomi as Vincent gathered his jacket, walked past the length of the table, opened the conference room doors for her with one quiet gesture, and without another explanation placed her beside him in a position no one else had ever been trusted to hold. Edit the following Thursday evening. the Romano Foundation hosted its annual Executive Partners Reception, an invitation-only gathering where every conversation carried the weight of multi-million-dollar decisions. Crystal chandeliers bathed the ballroom in warm amber light, while a jazz quartet filled the air with smooth, restrained melodies. The fragrance of white orchids, polished cedar, and freshly roasted espresso drifted between marble columns as New York's most influential guests gathered beneath the soaring ceilings. Naomi Brooks moved confidently through the ballroom with a slim tablet in one hand and Vincent Romano's schedule committed entirely to memory. Executives no longer asked where Vincent was. They stopped Naomi first. She adjusted arrival times, redirected introductions, and quietly declined meetings that did not deserve his attention. Each decision reflected Vincent's trust without ever requiring his explanation. Ethan Caldwell arrived shortly after sunset, his navy tuxedo crisp against the golden light. He greeted several investors before walking toward Naomi with an easy smile. "Congratulations," he said. "You've become the busiest person in the building." Naomi closed the tablet with a quiet click. "That's one way to describe it." Ethan laughed softly. "Then let me make one request before someone else fills your calendar." He paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "Coffee tomorrow morning?" Naomi looked instinctively across the ballroom. Vincent stood near the grand staircase, speaking with several international investors. He never interrupted the conversation, yet his eyes lifted for the briefest instant before returning to the discussion. Naomi caught the movement immediately. She looked back at Ethan. "I'll think about it. I'll accept that answer." Their exchange remained brief, respectful, and effortless, but dozens of guests noticed. Quiet whispers moved from table to table. Several board members exchanged curious glances, remembering the gala only days earlier when Naomi had asked Vincent the question no one else would dare ask. Tonight, everyone watched to see whether the answer would finally arrive. Moments later, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and invited Vincent to deliver the evening's closing remarks. Conversations dissolved into complete silence. Crystal glasses rested gently on linen-covered tables. Camera flashes reflected against polished marble as Vincent walked toward the podium with his usual calm precision. He thanked the donors, acknowledged the foundation's achievements, and spoke for only a few measured minutes before stopping unexpectedly. His eyes swept across the ballroom until they settled on Naomi. "Miss Brooks." Every face turned toward her. Naomi crossed the marble floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, her footsteps quiet against the polished stone. She stopped beside Vincent without asking why she had been called. Vincent lifted a black leather presentation folder from the podium and placed it into her hands. Inside rested an official executive commission embossed with the Romano crest and signed personally by him. He turned back toward the audience. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Miss Naomi Brooks will represent my office in every foundation matter, executive partnership, public appearance, and strategic engagement. Her decisions carry my authority exactly as though they were my own." Silence swept through the ballroom before astonishment erupted into applause. Board members slowly rose to their feet. Donors followed. Even Ethan joined the standing ovation, lowering his hands only long enough to look toward Vincent with quiet admiration. Vincent did not acknowledge the applause. Instead, he stepped aside, leaving Naomi alone at the center of the stage where every camera focused entirely on her. The coldest man in the room had answered every whisper not with an explanation, but with an unmistakable act of trust, and as the applause finally faded, he turned toward Naomi and said quietly enough that only she could hear, "Walk with me. It's time you heard the answer I chose instead of words. : Edit. Vincent led Naomi away from the applause through a quiet corridor lined with walnut paneling and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Moonlight stretched across polished marble while the faint sound of the jazz quartet dissolved behind thick oak doors. Cool evening air drifted through an open terrace, carrying the scent of cedar and trimmed boxwood from the gardens below. Neither of them hurried. Neither of them spoke. Naomi walked beside him with the black leather commission folder resting against her side, her fingertips brushing the embossed Romano crest as though testing whether the evening had actually happened. Vincent stopped at the terrace overlooking the city lights and rested one hand lightly on the limestone railing. The skyline shimmered across the Hudson in silver reflections. Naomi joined him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You said I would hear the answer," she said quietly. Vincent looked toward the river before turning to her. "You already have." Naomi let out a small breath that almost became a laugh. That wasn't an answer. Vincent studied her expression with the same calm attention he gave every important negotiation. It was. She folded her arms lightly, the cool stone beneath her fingertips holding the last trace of the evening's warmth. "Then explain it." Vincent reached into his jacket and removed the folded schedule she had rewritten weeks earlier, the one she had quietly corrected without asking permission. The paper had been folded and unfolded enough times that its edges had softened. He handed it to her. Naomi looked at it with surprise. "You kept this?" Vincent nodded once. "Because it was the first time someone beside me tried to make my life easier instead of making themselves more important." Naomi traced the crease running through the center of the page before looking back at him. The breeze lifted a loose curl beside her face. "That still doesn't answer the question." Vincent rested both hands on the railing. "When Ethan asked you for coffee, people stopped seeing you as the executive who earned every step beside me." His voice remained even, but every word landed with deliberate precision. "They started treating you like a prize someone might win." Naomi remained silent. The city below continued moving while the terrace stood perfectly still. Vincent looked directly at her. "I wasn't interested in competing with another man." He paused. "I was interested in making sure no one ever believed your place beside me depended on anyone's attention." Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the commission folder. The silver crest caught the moonlight. Suddenly, every quiet decision of the previous weeks connected into one unmistakable pattern. The promotion, the authority, the public trust. None of it had been impulsive. Every step had answered her question without speaking the words she expected. She smiled slowly, shaking her head once. "So your answer wasn't jealousy?" Vincent's expression softened by the smallest degree. "No." He glanced toward the ballroom, where the celebration continued beyond the glass. "Jealousy protects possession." He looked back at her. "Respect protects people." Naomi closed the folder and held it comfortably against her side. "You really shocked everyone." Vincent allowed the faintest smile to appear, quiet and genuine beneath the terrace lights. That was the point. Behind them, the ballroom doors opened as several board members searched for their chairman. But they stopped the instant they saw Naomi standing beside him with complete confidence and Vincent making no effort to reclaim the center of attention. Without a single announcement, everyone understood that the answer to one fearless question had never been hidden in a confession, but in the quiet choice of a powerful man who used his influence to elevate another person's dignity above his own pride. Edit the ballroom gradually returned to life behind the glass doors. But Vincent Romano and Naomi Brooks remained on the moonlit terrace for another quiet moment, watching Manhattan glitter across the Hudson. Warm light spilled from the reception hall onto the limestone floor while the faint notes of the jazz quartet floated into the cool night air, blending with the distant whisper of the courtyard fountain. Naomi rested the black leather commission folder against the stone railing, her fingertips lingering over the silver Romano crest. She looked toward Vincent with the same fearless composure that had unsettled him from the very beginning. "I suppose I finally have my answer," she said softly. Vincent nodded once. "You do." She smiled, shaking her head with quiet disbelief. "I spent weeks wondering whether you would ever admit it." Vincent adjusted the cuff of his charcoal jacket before looking directly at her. "Words can satisfy curiosity." His voice remained calm, carrying none of the cold distance that had once defined every conversation between them. Actions reveal intention. Naomi looked through the glass doors where board members now approached her before they approached him. Donors waited patiently for her guidance, and executives treated her authority as unquestionable because Vincent had chosen to make it so. Nothing in that room had changed by accident. Every decision, every promotion, every public gesture had been his answer long before he spoke it aloud. The ballroom doors opened quietly as Evelyn Pierce stepped onto the terrace carrying 2 crystal glasses filled with sparkling water. She placed them on a small stone table, offered Vincent a respectful nod, then turned to Naomi with the warmest smile she had shown since the day they first met. "Congratulations, Miss Brooks." Naomi accepted the glass. "Thank you." Evelyn glanced from one to the other before returning inside, leaving the terrace silent once more. Vincent lifted his glass without making a formal toast. Naomi mirrored the gesture. Crystal touched crystal with a clear, gentle note that echoed across the terrace. To new responsibilities? Naomi asked. Vincent looked toward the skyline. To earn trust. They each took a sip before setting the glasses down. Moments later, the master of ceremonies announced that the final guests were preparing to leave. Through the ballroom windows, Ethan Caldwell caught Naomi's eye from across the room. He smiled politely, raised his hand in a brief farewell, then walked toward the exit without hesitation or disappointment. Naomi watched him disappear through the grand entrance before turning back toward Vincent. "You know," she said with a quiet laugh, "he'll probably spend years wondering what happened tonight." Vincent allowed the smallest genuine smile to appear. So will everyone else. Together they walked back into the ballroom. Conversations paused for only a second before resuming with a different tone than before. Guests no longer looked at Naomi as the assistant standing beside the most powerful man in the room. They greeted her as the executive who had earned his complete confidence. Vincent noticed the change without acknowledging it. He simply stepped half a pace behind her as she accepted congratulations from foundation directors and business leaders, allowing the room to recognize the truth without a single additional explanation. Later, as the final chandeliers dimmed and the last limousine disappeared beyond the estate gates, Vincent and Naomi paused together beneath the towering entrance of the Romano Foundation. The cool night breeze carried the scent of cedar across the marble steps, while the city lights stretched endlessly beyond the iron gates. Naomi looked at Vincent one last time. "If I asked you that same question again," she said, "would your answer still be the same?" Vincent opened the passenger door of the waiting sedan for her before replying. "Yes." He waited until she stepped inside, then met her eyes with calm certainty. Because jealousy tries to keep someone close. Respect gives them every reason to stand beside you by choice. And on that quiet New York night, everyone remembered the shocking move, but only the two of them understood that the most powerful answer had never been spoken in the ballroom. It had been lived in every choice that followed.